Good morning, afternoon, evening, nighttime, delete is appropriate, everyone. I am Yuzral and this is the Tribble Timewarp. It is the 8th of July, we are in the middle of the Tribble test weekend, and this is the Starbase Fleet Defense scenario. It's actually been in the Tribble server for a while now, it's just that this scenario requires 15 players minimum to get going, so server populations on Tribble being what they are most of the time, they're pretty near zero. It was fairly hard to get a group together for this one, particularly at the times I was recording. That may just be my bad luck, who knows. However, the test weekend is on. If you haven't been to Tribble yet, get over there. You spend an hour on Tribble, you get a little pet Tribble on holodeck at some point. You do the Tholian ground missions, which I'll cover probably later
Civilian
today.
freighters and supply ships are outbound.
And you get
requesting escort to the warp out
unique
traffic
duty officer that has a really powerful ability against Tholians. It's something like 8% extra damage straight up both ground and space, which is handy. Anyway, the mission is kicking off. Initially, you have to escort 4 groups of freighters out to their nav points. Absolutely nothing happens during this first chunk of the mission. You get to talk about freighter captains who are saying things they probably shouldn't be saying on a recorded comm channel, and it's generally a time for the group to get its bearings, get itself sorted out. You'll have noticed, if you were paying attention, that when we initially warped in there was nobody covering Delta Group, so a few of us switched away and we're now splitting the teams fairly evenly, because in about a minute or so it's all going to go south in style. When the freighters reach the nav point, waves of enemies will begin warping in and the first phase of the assault starts up. In this case, we've got Klingons. That little bouncy thing was an isometric charge. You can see it's ricocheting between the various ships in the fleet, and it just wiped out one of the photonic ships with a 31k hit. And it wasn't exactly good on me either. Yes, that's potentially a one-shot if you're in a science vessel or an escort, and even if you aren't, it will leave you bruised. The Klingons got some major upgrades. This has been mentioned before, but the Vorchers now have the Vorkang module. The D7 subtypes, I believe, have the magnetometric overload. If you want to know what that does, there's an animated series episode called More Tribbles, More Troubles, and the status beam in that is basically an early version of this. It shuts down your engines and auxiliary power, and boom, yeah, that was another charge. You can see I'm and now I'm dead. Well, I didn't quite get to auxiliary to SIF, but wouldn't have made a difference. So yeah, Klingons now hit like a truck with the right combination of cruisers and dreadnoughts. So, quick dash back. As you can see, the last chap there is in a bit of a pickle, and now he's dead. So the question is, will the freighters last long enough? Are we about to lose the group? Why am I even looking at empty space? And where is my ship? Okay, so they were actually tied up on... Where is my ship? I've had problems in a few run-throughs with things like torpedoes and weapons fire and gravity wells not rendering in the engine, but this is the first time my entire ship has disappeared. Everything else seems to be rendering fine. I mean, I can't see anything else dropping out. It's like the game engine hits an object limit and then abruptly decides, you know what, I've had enough. So I'm essentially flying blind at this point, and okay, that's being held together by happy thoughts and string right now. Okay, and all the heals are on cooldown, so this is basically, oh lord, please don't shoot me. Just hope auxiliary comes off, rebalance the shields.
Enemy reinforcements
fast.
attacking Alpha Group.
That announcer gets really enthusiastic. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it depends on the specifics. But, right, loop back, tap in the gravity well to keep them bunched up. Where was I? Oh yeah, magnetometric overload. It shuts down your engines and your auxiliary power. So if you are in any way dependent on those, if you're an escort or a science vessel or a science-focused cruiser, this pat is really, really bad. It's insanely nasty because you're left drifting, so your defense value goes to the floor, which means more and bigger hits, and hazard emitter stops working, gravity wells, Titan's Rift, just about every deflector power, every auxiliary power, forget it. Which, okay, if you're an escort it's not so bad, if you're a cruiser it's tolerable, if you're a science vessel, well, just about everything I use runs off auxiliary power, which is why I've got to boost it. So, hey, I'm pretty much neutralised. I'm hoping engineering team clears it. I haven't really had a chance to experiment
Freighter group
yet.
Alpha away.
And I'm still slightly freaked out by the fact that I'm trying to manoeuvre with an invisible ship. It'd be nice, except, I don't know, it'd be nice if I was actually cloaked and firing while cloaked, but that'd be really, really game-breaking. So, 3 of the groups away. Delta, the one we're on, is struggling because, of course, we had that problem with the isometric charges wiping us out early on. But with a bit of luck, the other guys will show up, and here
Freighter
they
group
come.
Alpha away.
And with Wave 1 done and all 12 freighters successfully away, you get 30 seconds or so to pick up the pieces and get back to the Starbase for the second wave. This is basically a Zerg rush. There will be a massive, massive wave that just warps in and starts trying to pound the Starbase. Starbase goes up, you get marks. Starbase goes down, you don't, but at least it's not an automatic mission fail,
Large
which
enemy
it could
fleet
so
inbound.
easily have been. And here they come. So multiple groups scattered around. Again, they're manageable. This is all very close up. It very rapidly devolves into what can be politely described as a complete all-on-all melee. And given the sheer number of split vessels and multi-vector vessels we have, Cryptic perhaps need to look at if there's an object limit in their renderer. It's not like this system is underpowered. I mean, GeForce 590, a Core i7 that I'm running at 3.6, 3.7, so there is an overclock there. 12 gigs of RAM. It ought to be able to handle this, even with fraps in the background and even on admittedly very high quality settings. I'm not sure why it's dropping sprites at all. But you can see that this has turned into a complete melee. Yes, we're healing the Starbase. Yes, the Starbase needs healing because it takes a real pounding. Once you get to tier 1 and above, you do get a Starbase that actually shoots back. There's even an operational asset which will give it the Phaser Lance from the Galaxy X, which will be interesting to try because it's going to be quite hard to time it so you get the right shot. And of course the aiming is under AI control, so potentially you can line up half a dozen Negvars and the AI might very well decide, you know what, I'm going to blow that bird of prey over in outfield to Kingdom Come and completely ignore the sweet shot you guys just set up for me. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It'll also be interesting to see the animations. Are we going to have the entire Starbase rotate round and just fire out the bottom like it's kind of massive? Yeah, we basically built this base around the gun guys. Deal with it. That would be interesting. Gonna have to see how that plays out later on in Tribble as and when we get bigger Starbases and, of course, the operational asset. Regardless of that, once you've hacked down all the Klingons or indeed Borg, Jem'Hadar, whatevers that are attacking the Starbase, Phase 3 begins. This is where the difficulty level takes a bit of a spike, not because the enemies are any harder, but because you have got 30 seconds to split the group again and head back to the outlying bases. Now, this never works properly. In an organised group, everyone will remember where they need to go. It'll probably be a case of head to the same facility you escorted the freighters past.
Enemy ships are headed toward our outlying facilities.
But in Pugs, there's always one facility that's left a little undefended, and in this case, I think it's the Fabricator, looking at the way the minimap split during that mad dash. Klingon's hurt. Just for the record. So, pile on in.
Enemy ships are sabotaging our facilities.
And this happens. The attacking ships, in this case it's the Negvars, will attempt to close with the facility and start up a sabotage effort. This is represented by a little progress bar on the sabotaging ship, and the target facility's health dropping like a stone. They've got that under control, so actually I'm going to burn over to the fabricator array and see what the situation is there. Oh, that's why there's trouble. There's only 3 people covering it,
Industrial fabricator suffering heavy damage.
and the Negvar is getting its job done more or less unimpeded. So full impulse. First priority is going to be to stabilise the fabricator, so you get close. When you're within really close range, a couple of kilometres, maybe even less than that, you can beam over a damage control team that will undo some damage. It restores about 5% health, give or take. You can see it kicking off there. And it's not much, and you can only do it once per ship as far as I can tell, but it can make a difference, and it does by a few extra seconds to shove the sabotaging ship out of range, and I'm dead again. What did it that time? Not sure. That, it may be me, it may be that whole thing's not rendering bug, but it really needs some attention. I'm not even sure what's causing it. Anyway, it spawned me back at the main base and facing away from the fabricator, so loop round on full impulse and dash back. This is why you really don't want to die in phase 3, because even after the death penalty, it'll take you a solid 30 seconds to a minute to get back into the fight, and then you've got to reset your power levels from full impulse, so your combat ineffective for basically an additional 30 seconds after respawning. Anyway, we've packed those guys in. The Negvar has been stopped from sabotaging the base, so it's not all bad, and reinforcements are turning up. If I had to make one suggestion for an adjustment to this phase, it's that the radius in which you can beam a damage control team over to the starbase perhaps could stand to be increased a little. At the moment it seems to be about 1 kilometre. You practically have to dock with the thing to get the team on board, and that may be a little tight. On the other hand, if you want a situation...
Heavy vessels detected. Enemy ships on the line. 30 seconds to contact.
Get that guy some sedatives. If you want a situation whereby the players actually have to show some skill in manoeuvring their vessels, you don't want it to be too large, so perhaps expand out to 2 or 3 kilometres. Enough that it's outside the main fighting, but you don't have to be practically kissing hulls. Anyway, phase 3, the final phase. This is where the
large group of enemy contacts incoming.
Difficulty level goes right the way back down if you have a certain ability. 4 groups warp in, each consisting of 2 waves, and in particular there are 4 of these siege dreadnoughts. Now the exact class will depend on what race you're facing, of course, but they all behave in much the same way. That is to say, they will all trundle up to firing range about 10 to 15 kilometres away from the starbase and begin charging a very large gun. This gun takes about a minute or so to charge, and if you let it fire, well, frankly, you deserve what's coming to you. I hope, because I've never seen it happen, that it would be an instant kill from the starbase. It certainly takes long enough, and you get so many ways to counter it. Now, the brute force method is simply to kill the siege dreadnought, but these things are tough. You can see that I'm barely denting its hull and its shields here, despite concentrated fire. Granted, this is a science vessel, and I do have all the firepower of 3 pop guns aside. However, it's not immune to tractor repulsors. So all you have to do is keep shoving it away, and it gets really, really easy. Until that happens. Pride cometh, etc., etc. Nice touch, by the way, that the Bortus is using transphasics rather than quantums, so anyone who's shield tanking is in for a bit of a shock if they get cute with one of these and stray into its fire arcs. Now then, as you can see, it's just a case of pinning down the siege dreadnought and killing off the escorts. Potentially you can game this weakness at the moment. All you really need is 1 or 2 science vessels for 3 of the waves, who can just keep shoving it back and buying time, like so. And then the remaining ships of the fleet just trundle around the groups in sequence and wipe each of them out with concentrated firepower. Now that's going to require a bit of coordination, and I'm tempted to say it shouldn't be nerfed, but even in a disorganised pug like this one, and bear in mind I'm not running the text chat, I'm not communicating at all, we're running this purely on what the other guys are doing and essentially interpreting the starship equivalent of body language, really, in terms of what they're shooting and what powers are being deployed. So I might be persuaded that the siege dreadnought needs to be made immune to pushbacks from things like tractor repulsors. On the other hand, would that leave you with too tight a clock to kill all 4? Dilemma. Maybe a heavy resistance, or just make it a bit faster, so it's not a crawl into range and hey, 1 shove of tractor repulsors has bought you 2 or 3 minutes. This part of the mission could certainly stand to be made harder, particularly with regard to the Bortas, whether that's by speeding the dreadnoughts up or making them resistant to tractors a la the Borg cubes, which I believe can't be hit with tractor repulsors at all, or whether you shorten the charge time on the big gun so as to punish anybody careless enough to get one into range. It's something that's probably going to need a lot of work on Tribble before this goes live. What really has to be fixed, and this is an absolute game breaker of a bug at the moment, is the tendency of the game to drop sprites. So it just won't render weapons fire, it won't render... Oh, well, in one case, of course, it just didn't render my ship, because I presume the engine couldn't cope. It's interesting that there was no frame rate drop associated with this, so I'm not sure what's triggering it, honestly. Because normally if a game is staggering and you're overloading the graphics and card and the processors, you get frame rate spikes, you get stutters, you get dropping. You don't see the renderer just not doing certain things, and that really has to be addressed in this game, because I have all the quality settings jammed up on max and it's still holding a fairly thorough 30 frames a second, but am I paying for this with missing information? And if that's the case, that's a trade-off I don't want to be making, and it really does need some attention. If it's just the engine hitting its limits in terms of the number of objects it can render at any given moment, then that again needs to be addressed hard before this patch goes live, for much the same reasons as above, because in that case it's not tied to graphics quality at all. It's simply the netcode or the game just can't keep up. Either way, it is a serious game breaker, and
Long-range
really,
sounding the all clear.
Really the mission shouldn't be going live to holodeck without this being addressed. You can see the summary there, so 28 fleet marks for what was a 20 odd minute mission. That's fairly on par with what Cryptic had been saying and doing with regards to their reward versus time target. It seems to be about 1 fleet mark per minute. Something that Cryptic have introduced with the latest patch to Tribble is a cooldown timer, not for DOF missions, go away, for PvE missions. So you can see now that the fleet defense is on a 30-minute cooldown. Fleet alerts still got 4 minutes to go, the other 2 are available. I don't think this is to throttle the supply of fleet marks available to players from these missions, because if it is intended to do that, it's so generous and there are so many different missions you can take that it's an utter failure. What I do think it's intended to stop is people just grinding, say, fleet blockade over and over again in a single unbroken chain of missions moving from one to the other without pause. It was really quite hypnotic. And a little bit of variety is certainly to be commended, given that it will go some way towards keeping people interested. Otherwise, of course, you're just going to get a situation where people grind up a few hundred fleet marks, turn them in, and then say, you know what, I'm not going near that mission again. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yuzral. That has been the Tribble Timewarp, and if there is a next time, I'll see you then.